Hiring Happenings is the new podcast from Recruiting Gym, bringing you hiring news every month with a pestle twist.
Sponsored by Monster.
Hello and welcome to Hiring Happenings with a pestle twist. This is our monthly podcast where we get to delve into a topic in detail with two fabulous guests. I've got Joe Major and Keith Rosser with me today. I'll get them to introduce themselves in a moment. The pestle twist is all about politics, economics, sociological, legislative, technological and environmental, and I know I spelled pestle wrong there, topics, so we can give you information on what's going on. We're going to focus on the first 6 months in the UK here, and then we're going to go global for the second 6 months of 2024. I'm Angela Cripps, the MD of the Recruiting Gym. We get to bring this to you thanks to Monster, who have been supporting job seekers for the last 30 years. It's their 30th anniversary this year. So thank you to them as well. Right, enough of that. Let's get into the gas. So when I thought sociological, I must admit my first person that came to mind was Joe Major. Hi, Joe, if you could introduce yourself to the people.
Hi, Angela. Thank you. So I'm Joe Major. I am founder of Diversity in Recruitment. My background is the recruitment industry, 24 years in, and I now spend my time working with recruiters and recruitment business leaders, helping them get to grips with diversity, equity and inclusion, and relating that into how they recruit and how they support their clients.
Well, there's so many topics within that relate to sociological. So I'm really looking forward to delving into that. I've seen you talk many times. I'm always enthused by what you say. There's always things I can take away from it. So thank you for that. Keith Rosser. Keith, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Angela. My name's Keith Rosser. So 20 years in the labour market. I work for Reed. I set up a pre-employment screening company for them about 10 years ago. I'm also chair of the Better Hiring Institute, which works with UK governments to make hiring faster, fairer and safer in the UK. And I'm a non-executive board member with an arm's length body of Home Office and Scottish Government.
I must admit, when we looked at pestle and we looked at Keith, it was like, actually, you could be involved in nearly all of these. So I'm so glad to get you onto this one. Let's start then with DE&I, and certainly from a societal point of view, this is probably the piece that has moved on the dial the most over the last few years. So for you then, Joe, if we can get into that, what's sort of the key area of diversity, equity, inclusion that you're talking the most about at the moment?
So what I talk to recruitment businesses a lot about is them looking at their social responsibility when it comes to the part that they play in making sure that people can access great employment opportunities and everybody has an equal opportunity to great work. So driving forward that message that as an industry, we have the potential to break down the barriers that people face when it comes to their background, their identity and their circumstances, and that connection with work. And, big picture thinking, I want to harness the power of the recruitment industry to really drive forward this message that collectively we can we can't just turn the dial on it. We could flip the switch on it overnight. If we all collectively came together to really think about actually what does our responsibility look like as an industry to make sure that everybody gets into work, and how do we tackle some of the things that are stopping people getting into work because of their identity and the socioeconomic background and all the other identity markers that we know play such a role in whether or not we're successful or we're not when it comes to getting into recruitment processes and ultimately getting hired.
Now, you and I both hosted a panel last week on the stage at the Recruitment Agency Expo, and it was really interesting because we came from two very different angles. One of my guests stating that one of the best things about the recruitment industry is the low barrier to entry, that anyone can join. And of course, the day before I'd seen your panel and I was like, that's true, but it's not, is it?
Yeah, and I appreciate that you kind of spotlighted that in the conversation. We we all operate quite comfortably in this belief system that, you know, we're in a meritocracy, and it's really about an individual's strength of will and desire to be able to get to where they want to be. And if they just, you know, get their heads down and persevere enough, you can be anybody you want to be. And that is a beautiful story. And, you know, and we know people across industry that have managed to achieve that, but it's not the reality for millions and millions of people. And what I find really fascinating is that our industry, it could be a melting pot of identity, because there isn't any barriers to get into it. You know, anybody can get into recruitment and have an incredible career and be super, super successful on paper, in theory. But then, you know, we look around and we're not seeing that diversity. We're not seeing those levels of representation. We may see better representation at certain kind of like entry points across the industry, but it feels to me that the higher we get up, the more that representation tends to drop off. And that's a conversation that, you know, that I really try to have as much as possible in the industry.
Now every recruiter can have an impact on this. So this can be the individual, can make a difference. But Keith, I'm going to come to you because you work for Reed, one of the oldest and one of the biggest independent recruitment agencies. So from your point of view, what are you doing to help with this?
Yeah, so you know, Brexit and COVID have changed our labour market fundamentally, and we're in a position of really high vacancies, aren't we, with a changing demographic, changing workforce, and actually being able to attract people that have been outside of the labour market traditionally is essential if we're going to close the gap on some of these vacancies and drive UK productivity, the economy. So, you know, to pick up on what Joe said, the recruitment industry has got a really huge role to play in boosting diversity and getting more people into work, basically. At Reed, particularly as an independent, family-owned business, you know, getting people into work and helping people, particularly from diverse backgrounds, has always been really important to us. So whether it's schemes around supporting ex-military, people with criminal records, women in work, or diverse sort of ethnic groups, it's always been essential to us. I think in terms of what the recruitment sector can do and what Reed do, there's a lot of research out there that shows, you know, what's quite a traditional, if you like, old-fashioned hiring process really stops and prevents people from different backgrounds engaging in work. So how can we, as a recruitment business, but also as an industry and then as society as a whole, how can we redesign the way hiring processes are run? What are we putting in job adverts? What is the selection process? The old style view of just submitting CVs. What about interviews? There's so much remote work now. Is remote interviewing suitable for everybody? How can we better support people who maybe have different needs? We hear from neurodiverse candidates that, you know, Teams interviews aren't necessarily the optimal things for them, all the way through then to sort of the job design in the first place and how are we attracting people from different backgrounds. So, you know, really what we're advocating is a pretty root and branch review of the whole job design and then hiring process to make sure we can best attract and engage people who traditionally have been outside of the workforce, but absolutely think the recruitment sector could be a driving force in this.
Yeah, wouldn't it be wonderful? And I can see you nodding, Joe, because this is your world, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, for me, there's an understanding that something needs to be done. You know, we know that recruitment processes haven't evolved significantly for decades, and that originally recruitment processes were built by majority people for majority people, right? And what I find is that, so, I mean, we are talking about people, yes, outside of the workforce, but we're also talking about people inside of the workforce as well, who, for various reasons, are probably not realizing their full potential, or they're not through fear of bias and prejudice and discrimination, potentially a lack of belief in the recruitment process, belief in the recruitment industry and their ability to support, potentially either choosing not to move, to stay put, or to not work with us altogether because of their lived experience of engaging with us, and perhaps facing some of these barriers or worse, discrimination and prejudice at the hands of people within the industry, and also admittedly within direct employers as well. So I just feel there is a resistance to change. And I see the activity that I see is there's good intentions behind it, but things like changing the job boards that you advertise on and evolving the way you write your adverts, that they're a small part of a great big ecosystem that is needed, not just from a recruitment process perspective, but hiring, training, changing mindsets, improving the way, then the skill set and the way that we actually conduct recruitment and interviewing, but also taking that a step further and thinking about our employer brands and looking at the employee brand propositions of our clients, and that whole talent attraction piece.
Yeah, and just some simple practical things. When you were talking earlier, I was thinking, if I was a consultant, I could literally just look back at all my placements over the last year and then break down what is the DE&I within that. And does that represent the geographical area that I represent? Because, of course, that will be very different. If you're just working London, then obviously BAME is going to be way higher than if you were in Aberdeen, let's say. But does it represent what you represent? And I bet if you just broke that down, you'd look at it and go, no. So where am I missing out on all those candidates that are out there that could potentially be filling all these other jobs that I'm not filling? So just that reflection to start with, to see what are you doing well, where are you missing a trick,
who's missing, like you just said. One of the most powerful things that we can do is look at who's not on the short list, who's not applying for jobs. But going back just really, really quickly around those data points, we haven't, a lot of us haven't even got the infrastructure to be able to collect diversity and demographic in the first place. And we are literally making assumptions about people's gender identity and race and ethnicity based on the colour of the skin that we see on LinkedIn profiles. And I mean, that's a whole different topic.
I must admit, I got hooked on The Gentleman. If anyone hasn't watched The Gentleman yet, if you liked the film, it's a Guy Ritchie film. They've done an 8-part series based on it as well. And there's one bit where he's in a Chinese restaurant, this big Chinese chef comes out, and he ends up fighting him. And he sits down, and then the big boss calls, and he goes, okay, well, he wants to talk to you. And this guy talks with a really sort of English accent, and you could just see his face and he's go, yeah, you made an assumption there, didn't you? Just because he's a Chinese man in a Chinese restaurant. No, he's born and bred here. And it was really obvious, the reaction on his face, and think that shouldn't be, we shouldn't be making those assumptions. But unfortunately, we all have inner bias. Let's get into some of those stats. Keith, this month you were at the Modernising Employment Parliamentary Group, and there were some pretty bad ones, weren't there?
Yeah, so the most recent session in Parliament for modernising employment was about women in work, centred around International Women's Day. And it was all about what are the barriers facing women getting into work, but also progressing in their career. And we had a range of speakers, experts. We had the lady who helped uncover the Harvey Weinstein scandal. We had a female chief exec and leader who spoke about personal experience. But we also had an academic who spoke about the data, the challenges, the research around this subject. And I think what really hit home for me as the father of 3 young girls was that on the current trajectory, doing all the things that the UK is currently doing, it will take another 153 years before we've got true equality for men and women. And, I sort of can't help but stand outside of the primary school gates when I do school pickup and see primary school age children coming out of the school and immediately think, well, actually, here's white boys who are coming out of the school. Are they already in the number one position to succeed? Here's then white girls, maybe they're second, and then you get into the sort of, as we've already talked about, the sort of other ethnic groups, boys and then girls. And it's terrible, isn't it, to think that even seeing 6 and 7-year-olds coming out of a school in this context of actually there's a hierarchy of who's most likely to succeed. And it's, you know, very sad, and we need to do a lot more than we are doing to put that right. So alongside the statistics that were very sobering, to hear about some of the things that could be done, about how jobs are designed. A lot of people now work from home post-COVID, so can job design have a bigger, more strategic role in how we can create human-centered jobs? Should it be that jobs primarily are flexible unless there's an occupational reason to not make a job flexible? At the moment, I tend to find that job descriptions and adverts still start with 9 till 5 in the office, but actually, should they start with work anywhere, work anytime, unless there's any reason why they can't? All the way through then to the sort of language that might put people off, the process itself that we've already talked about, and then the particular challenges that are unique to women, especially health-related challenges that are different and need to be thought about. There's so much in there that there's much more too that I feel strategically we could address, but it's focusing everybody on driving that change forward, which again is why I think the recruitment industry, and there were many recruitment agencies in that room in Parliament, have got a really key role to help drive this.
It was as though someone was going da-da as we went through that. It's like, here's our light bulb moment, literally, that they could do that. I mean, women in employment, it's certainly the discussion of the moment, or maybe that's just because I've got involved in it, and I really want to push this forward and have been for a few years. I'm very keen. Well, a starting point, this was always going to be set up one male, one female, and with as much diversity as I could find as well. My panel last week, 2 females, 2 men. We can do it if we put a bit of effort into it, don't we? But unfortunately, we're not always doing that.
I think what also struck me in Parliament was the stories of the female speakers, even the female that's now a chief executive and has done well, to hear about their experience going through work. A lot of it fairly unpalatable stuff, sorts of wrong type of attention that they'd attracted from senior staff. I think it just really struck me how people's experiences in work are so different. It's really sad.
And the thing is, you won't be able to understand truly. So you won't be able to sympathise. You can empathise, but what women have been through, and certainly as a white woman, I know that I'm in a position of privilege, and I've forced my way through on a lot of occasion and not taken no for an answer. But the majority of women don't do that, do they, Jo?
No, and I think it's a really important point, actually, Angela, that you've made, because sometimes we have this tendency, don't we, to kind of like spotlight the women that did smash through the glass ceiling and prevented themselves from, falling off the glass cliff and prized themselves off the sticky floor, and we role model them. I know we could go through all
the vision, definitely.
Yeah. When we role model them and we spotlight them, and we're like, what, look, if Angela can do it, what an incredible vision. Let's just emulate all the things that Angela did. But I guess if you were to actually think about all those things that you also had to compromise on, or maybe the people that you had around you that gave you the opportunity to get to where you are, and also you've rightly so acknowledged some levels of privilege over other women, especially women from marginalised groups, those things that have contributed to that. Had some of those things not been around you, if you, even right down to, influences from our parents, peers that we've been lucky enough to have around us, men in particular, if I think about the number of men that have created space for me, they probably equal the number of men that have taken away space from me as well. And especially when I think about like kind of like that pinnacle moment in my career when I got the opportunity to completely change direction from being on desk, that was because my male manager saw me, and then my next male manager saw me. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge the role that our male allies play in that as well. We still have, as Keith said, we've got so much to do. And for me, it's about really, there are things that we can do kind of on the surface, but it's about really addressing the systemic reasons why women are underrepresented and marginalized in the workplace. And that sometimes is the bit that makes us feel very, very uncomfortable, and ultimately makes the people in positions of power and authority really uncomfortable, because if we have to start to change the really serious stuff, it's almost like we've also at the same time got to admit that it's problematic and we may have played a part in it. And I'm always bewildered as why people find that so difficult. If somebody highlighted to me and said, that thing that you did all those years ago, well, it created a lot of problems for me. And instead of going, no, I don't think it did, and I don't think I've got to evolve as a person, I'd just be like really apologetic and take it on the chin. But, if we start to really look at the systemic reasons, it means that a lot of people have got to be accountable for this stuff. And I sometimes think that's what creates a lot of the resistance, is looking in the mirror.
If we can get the mindset that every day is a learning day, as long as you're bettering yourself, it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter, but if it was 10 years ago, you can put your hands up and say, that was me 10 years ago. I'm a different person now. I want to learn. I want to develop. And that resolves that for me straight away. I wouldn't have an issue with that. And I'm like, good on you. And we see that when people are cancelled on social media, that the ones that put their hands up and say, yeah, that was wrong. And that's not how I feel now, or I have learned and I've realised that was a bigoted view, or whatever it was at the time. We're all encompassing with those. We'll take them in and go, great, let's train. It's the ones that deny it and say, well, I don't see why I should apologise for that. You're not helping.
I also think that a lot of this is around resources, and this is about money. I think levelling the playing field up for women is going to be expensive. Right.
Well, it's going to be 150 years worth. They better come out.
But I mean, just in terms of, one of the main levels of resistance that I see from organisations is looking at family building benefits. I honestly don't get why organisations are not joining the dots between the lack of female leadership within their organisations and the exit points of women when they have kids, and that women are having to make choices around their financial ability to be able to take time out to keep the human race going, and I find that really, really problematic. 12 weeks. 90% pay, or even if it's actually 6 weeks. I mean, women and men and people, everybody who's starting a family are having to make some really, really tough decisions. There are people whose economic position is preventing them from starting a family, and that's an absolute tragedy. So I think, for organisations, especially if we're relating this into the recruitment industry, how many recruitment businesses are offering beyond statutory maternity and paternity? How many organisations are we seeing offering full pay for 6 months? And when we think about like leveling the playing field, we want to level the playing field for all genders, right?
It makes it really difficult. I'm glad to see there's quite a few bits of new legislation coming in around this area that I learned about at the expo last week, and we will be delving into on the L of PESTLE for the legislative, because there were 9, I think, different new legislations that's going to impact the recruitment industry. So we've got to tackle all of those. Now, I mentioned the 150 years, and I've just realised that with the average age of birth, which is around 29, 30 at the moment, is 5 generations. And we have been talking a lot about 5 generations in the workplace and the issues that has been causing. And this is something for both recruitment companies, we work with in-house and agency, but of course, business as a whole, this is something that they have been struggling with. So Keith, have you got any information on that 5-generational piece?
Yeah, I think we've got an aging workforce for sure. I think one of the impacts of COVID was more early retirement, and many of those people haven't necessarily returned to the labour market. Again, I don't think we've done enough to attract people back. It comes back to the previous point about job design. Why do we need jobs to be 9 to 5 in an office? Because we're not going to attract early retirees back to the labour market in a 9 to 5 job in an office. So, I was talking to at a conference of estate agents a few weeks ago, and it was about this idea that actually technology, change in the way we hire, remote hiring and artificial intelligence is decoupling, or should be decoupling, where people live to where people work. And the relevance to estate agents is obvious, that actually where we might live in future might be completely different from where we lived in the past, because people shouldn't in the future need to choose living locations based on how much work is in that area. We should move away from that strategically into a situation where, other than frontline work, we should be able to move work around the regions and have people work in a more remote, anywhere, anytime capacity. And I'm saying this now because, do I think we have worked out how to attract early retirees back in a strategic way by offering them work that suits them? No, and I think there's plenty of work to do there. And then, of course, at the other end of the spectrum, we've got this other challenge of this disconnect for young people moving into work, and the changing values and ideas that young people have got about what they want out of work, but also where they work. This idea that we should sort of be able to live locally, work anywhere. Young people coming out of colleges and business schools around the UK who are faced with having to move to big cities to get jobs that they perhaps want. Whereas why can't they live locally, work anywhere? So I think what we've seen is this big demographic change, and other than, as Joe said earlier, other than these little piecemeal changes, we've not actually addressed the problem strategically and changed the way we operate to help, as the government said in November, get 1.1 million more people into work. We come out with these headlines, and but we don't really back it up with proper reform.
It's frustrating to me because we've seen such a change, and COVID brought that forward probably 4 or 5 years with regards to remote working. And I know we've been pushing it for the recruitment industry for a long time, and there were a lot of people saying, no, can't work. And we proved that it did. So to then go back, we're watching a current situation at the moment with Boots. So one of the biggest employers in Nottingham have recently said that from September, everyone's going to be back in the office. And a lot of people over the last 4 years have been hired based on the fact that they are remote and they can be anywhere and work from anywhere. And I've loved working with people. They're in the south of France in their villa and they're working. And I'm like, you've got it sussed. I love that. But then all of a sudden, if your company says, no, everyone's back in, then they're going to lose a lot of great staff because of that. They're already going to be looking. So it's sort of one to watch to see the impact of that, as to how that, with regards to their attraction and retention of staff. So if you are in Nottingham listening to this and you weren't aware of that, then get on that pretty quickly to find out. But what we have seen, and certainly with the clients that I work with, is that the younger generation do prefer to be in the office more. They want to learn, they want to see role models, and they want to get out of their rooms because they haven't necessarily got the space or a study to work from where they are. So it's not even conducive to their working situation. So the flexibility is critical. Joe, what's your views on these 5 generations?
Oh, I think I just mentioned, just adding on to what you were saying, I think it's important for people to have choice. Okay, and it's this mandating this way or no way. I think that yes, there are, our Generation Zers. Yes, there are, there are a collective of them who enjoy being in the office, but there are also equally, there's the same amount of people who want that ability. They want that. They want the choice, right? And it's just a human thing, isn't it? We want to make a choice and have control over our lives. Our generation Z is more than anyone else, right? They want that freedom. They're not as tied into the establishment of work as were, my generation or the boomers above me, right? And I think what I find is there is a lot of assumptions made on behalf of other people without deep consultation. And I found this in businesses that I've worked for. There's a sense that, do you know what? Everybody's struggling with this whole like working from home vibe. So I've spoken to a few people and we're going to bring everyone back. And it's like, sometimes we almost want to create our own narrative based on the things that we want to hear. And for me, it will always go back to choice, giving people an opportunity. We cannot forget that there is a drive to make our workplaces more representative of the communities that we serve and sit in by mandating everybody to go back to the office full time, which is why the Boots decision to launch that press release I think it was 2 days before International Women's Day had such a catastrophic impact on their employer brand, because we know that working from the office full time automatically impacts women. It impacts parents, it impacts single parents, it impacts carers. I was reading the other day that one in 5 women over the age of 55 will be a carer, right? Caring responsibilities, people with disabilities, people with long-term health conditions, people taking medication, people neurodivergent, and also people who face discrimination and prejudice at work tend to prefer to be away from the office. So a company like Boots, for example, waxing lyrical about their ED&I objectives, and then they're like, everybody back to the office. And you're like, okay, there's 50% of the population not considered. So I think it's always I think businesses have got to be really careful. I'm like thinking, who was in the room when you decided to issue that statement, let alone like make that decision? I don't think there was 50% women around that table, because they would have said, shall I have my notice in now, because that's not going to work for me. And I think when, going back to your original question around, different generations, we've never had so many generations in the workplace. I mean, for me, that's like, try to encourage a move away from stereotyping. Yes, there is data to back some of our beliefs up. But I think if you've got a multi-generational workforce, I don't think you can make decisions on behalf of people because of big data. I think it's around really understanding your people and surveying them and consulting them and really listening to them.
Yeah, I guess it comes back to your values, and that's something whenever I'm working with companies and saying when they're recruiting, start with the values, because you want as diverse as possible. You want people that aren't like you. That will make for a stronger team, but the values have got to be there, and that then is multi-generational. It doesn't
Absolutely.
matter, does it? So that is something. So as a recruiter, are you asking that question? Are you talking about the values within the team? And if they haven't worked it out for themselves, if they don't know what the majority values are within that team, then I've got one document, 10-minute exercise, they can all work it out and do it from there. So I'll put that in the resources for this as well, because that's a great add-on that you could share with your customers to say, well, let's look at it from this point of view as well. Everything else, yes, but what about this point? Because hiring based on values-based hiring is critical to get everyone working together and going in the same direction. Doesn't matter what age or who they are.
Culture fit is value alignment, it's leadership, it's management, it's team dynamics. Social fit is, I want to get on with everybody. Is everybody similar to me? Do we like hanging out here? Do we like this type of music? Do we like that kind of sport? Do we like eating in these types of restaurants? Moving away from hiring people just because they remind us of us or they're people that we like, and doing exactly what you just said, getting the value alignment.
I mean, it makes for a great atmosphere in an office, but not a high-performing team. And I think that's the realization that people have finally got to. So let's get the values aligned, get a high-performing team. And you're going to have fun in the office anyway, if you've got all of that going in, or wherever you're based, to pick up from there. So as someone that's only a few weeks away from that 55, let's just focus in a little bit more on that aging workforce, because Keith, you mentioned there about the amount of people that did disengage from the workforce, especially during COVID, realizing actually I have hardly got any mortgage left, and I don't have to earn a lot of money. I don't have to be in the rat race. I don't have to be going to work every day and commuting. I could move to the north, have no bills to pay in that sense, and do something else. So you mentioned about trying to get them back. So where's this coming from?
Yeah, so I think one of the problems that caused the UK was that it was a real drain of experience and skills in a very short time. I don't think in living memory we've had a drain of skills and experience like that in such a short period of time. It was quite a shock to the labour market, and I think we're worse off for it now. People in that age bracket have got so much to offer in terms of mentoring capability, experience, as well as skills to bring. And it's about how we could use those people in potentially different ways in future. If 9 to 6 job, is not something that they will ever want to move back to, what might they come back for? We talked about choice earlier. I think choice, flexibility, the ability to work remotely. I think all those things would help bring people back to the workforce, but also thinking about what it is we want them to do. So how can we use the skills and experience of people who have left the labour market to help those left in the labour market? What sort of roles could they play? Advisory capacities, mentoring capacities. There's such value in helping, junior execs who haven't perhaps been there and experienced it all, with quite turbulent times, learning from experienced hands. So I think there's so much value in terms of having people return to the labour market. I think we've got to be creative in how we address that issue and how we try and bring people back. But we also have to be realistic too, that as you say, for many people, the bills are minimal, the mortgage is gone, and they're living in some lovely part of the UK now, and that they're happy with that. So I don't think we should be aiming to see 100% return. I think we should be looking at how we could just attract a fraction of that group back into the labour market to benefit all of us.
Yeah, I mean, even if we got 25% back, they do say, don't they, if doctors and politicians are looking young, you're getting old. But and I keep coming back to politics on every single one of these because it does impact everything. But when I've been watching, especially our UK politics here, we saw that brain drain actually happen in real time as well. There were so many people that left the parties that were in their 50s and 60s that were just like, I'm out and I don't want to deal with this anymore. This isn't what I joined politics for. And I look at the people that are running the country and around the world, and the level of knowledge and experience to me, and maybe I'm biased in some way, shape or form, but I'm looking at them thinking, really? You're in charge? And it just doesn't give me confidence in any way, shape or form. I'm wondering if I'm being ageist, but I don't think I am.
I don't think that you are being biased. Look, we're seeing is the disconnect between the lived experience of the UK public and some of the decisions that are being made on our behalf, and it's baffling. Absolutely baffling. One of the things that I think I'd like to pick up on it, I would be really interested to understand the demographics of those boomers and maybe the older gen X's that had the privilege of leaving the workforce early, because my challenge is always the thing that I'm always going to address is, what about those people whose identity, backgrounds and circumstances meant that they have to stay in the workplace, that they don't have they don't have the economic resources and privileges attached to that to make that choice? Because the opportunity to retire is being reduced, right? It's not even anything that I, as a 45-year-old woman, can even start to think about, let alone at, the generations below me, your millennials and our Gen Zers. And so for me, it's about, we've got obviously an aging population, those that are left, the challenges that they face from a discrimination and prejudice perspective, and the fact that we are also talking about increasing retirement age. And the really confusing bit for me is we're making people stay in work longer. They are not able to draw down their state pensions until potentially over 70. The data tells us that from the age of 40, especially women, start to face age discrimination and prejudice, and it starts to impact where they're at career-wise. Those are in positions of power and authority, and not still face discrimination and prejudice, but they've made it, and it's the ones that are aspiring that are hitting that kind of that glass ceiling from an age perspective. So if we're lucky, we might get to around 50 or 55 before it. If we become unemployed or if we are made redundant, our chances of getting back into work for both men and women over the age of 55 it's pretty depressing. It's pretty depressing reading. So what on earth are we going to do if we've increased retirement age to 70 and we're not addressing the most prominent form of discrimination in the workplace, which is age discrimination? What on earth are we going to do with people for 15 years? How on earth are they going to be able to feed themselves and pay their mortgages and look after their kids and put their kids through uni?
But I think there's something that's been missed here that hasn't been talked about. And certainly it's been my experience and my friends. The Gen X's, so we are the children of the generation that could buy their council houses for the first time. We're now the generation that are inheriting houses or quite considerable amounts of money. And I think this is what also impacted why people went, no, that's fine. I don't have to do that work. I can do something else for less money. Because actually, we've suddenly got an influx of people with inheritance that never had it before. There was never that opportunity. And because of the housing market, it's a considerable amount of money as well.
I'd like to think that the government were going to be focusing on preventing and stopping age discrimination than relying on the fact that there may be some boomers with big pots of cash, because if we also then bring in the care system, we're so getting political, right? There are, and also linking inheritance to socioeconomic and class status. Again, we see lower socioeconomic groups being impacted by this stuff. The marginalized are always the people who are even more marginalized by whatever societal and economic and political changes that we see in society, right?
So recruiters out there, you have a chance to make a difference to all of this. You can go out and find those pockets of people that have great skills, just maybe don't have the opportunity. And that's your job, actually, as a recruiter, to find the best person for the job. So where are you looking? Have you considered lots of other opportunities? Have you reviewed what you have been doing and what's missing, where those gaps are? We've had so many little nuggets of activities that people can do to make a difference. Now, obviously, connect with you two as well, and certainly click the bell on their LinkedIn, so whenever they post you're getting information about them, because Keith, you share some fantastic stuff, and obviously being linked in with the parliamentary things as well. You've got the one coming up in May is looking at the generations, isn't it? So that's going to be the next one. So there's always great data and information from you. Joe, you're constantly on this is your job, this is your company, and therefore if you need help or support, then please do reach out as well. Thank you to my guests. Great conversation. Loads of topics covered. We haven't changed the world yet, but we will. It's probably the best way to leave it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.